10 years ago, on June 1st, 2012, Moscow got a new territory. The area of the city has increased by about 3 times, and it suddenly turned out that Moscow one of the greenest metropolises in the world, because the new Moscow almost entirely consisted of villages and forests. New Moscow stretched from the Moscow Ring Road and almost to the bordering region. There were ambitious plans for this territory. At almost every Mos Urban Forum, everyone discussed it. How cool we were going to make an ultra-modern city. We will transfer the officials here from the Moscow city center. We will make cool mid-rise, low-rise buildings, townhouses, and create new mobility. You won't need a car. That's what they said about 10 years ago. Today it is already possible to draw some conclusions. Therefore, we will write around the areas that are being built and sold. We will look at transport infrastructure and talk about these mistakes. Because in words everyone sounded perfect, but in really they built new human settlements in the green field, without thinking about how people would live here. In short, let's get comfortable. Today we are considering the town planning mistakes of the new Moscow. This is Alexander Pechorsky Street. Here we will talk about how not to make streets and roads and about the principles of a compact city, which is not here. Let's start with the streets. According to the plans of the mayor's office in the new Moscow, they are going to build about 250 kilometers of new streets. It was planned to spend more than $3 billion on this. This is a lot. But besides the numbers, there's also such a criteria as quality. But there is no quality here, because the streets in New Moscow are designed terribly. Look, here we have a roundabout with 3 traffic lights, but the traffic incoming here from only 1 or 2 lanes. Outgoing streets are usually single lane. I have a question. Why are there 3 lines in the circle itself? Maybe because someone wanted to have a conflict points and road accidents? But probably because they don't care. That's why. At the same time, it is clear that everyone is driving in almost one line. It turns out that it's possible to narrow it down, make it smaller, or even the buses would pass, or at least do a turbo roundabout. This is a circle in which each lane have its own direction. Therefore, the circle have no conflict points. In whole, they like to do it outside the city. But the circle is not the only problem, because they built a car overpass. Imagine, I am now standing in the green field, where a car overpass has been built at the level of the 3rd floor. What for? Why? You have a circle motion. There is no traffic light here, but there is a traffic light after the intersection. And then the question, why did you build a car overpass if all this flow will still run in the traffic light? Maybe someone thought that the construction budget was too small and decided to increase it this way, and they didn't come up with anything smarter than making an intersection. In addition to wrong roads, there is a sidewalk that is inconvenient for pedestrians and cyclists. Also there is a bike path sign, but it was made at the expense of the pedestrian zone and was made simply by the point method. And at the same time, of course, there is no cycling crossing. Also, there is the most dangerous places for cyclists, because car accidents happen here, and the danger comes from cars, not pedestrians. Therefore, it is necessary to build cycling infrastructure at intersections with cars in the first place. Recall the fact that all this was built in the green field. It was possible to do well, but they couldn't do it well because first of all they did the road, and everything else was done by the usual principle. Here you can clearly see they tried to make a separation. This is a sidewalk, and here we see a tactic navigation. It is understood that people with visual problems can live here and that the city should be accessible to them. They shouldn't have any problems. But what do we see else? First, the fence. Well, there are a lot of fences here. According to the logic of the policemen and designers, there is a universal solution for all problems. But if a person walks along tactic navigation, he rides against the pole. Because from the beginning they made a project where there would be only asphalt. Then they gave it to all other designers and they began to put signs, fences, navigations and so on. If you look at old Moscow streets, built even in the 1960s, you'll see that these problems do not exist here. Probably the designers walked and knew about the problems of pedestrians in the city. That signs, fences, everything it should stand on the buffer part of sidewalk. Not on the sidewalk where people walking, but on the side, for example, where bushes and trees are grows. This is the way it doesn't create problems for the passage of the people with limited mobility or for street cleaning. It looks like we actually know how to do it, but the problem is that no one cares about the quality. Everyone cares only about how to build more and more expensive. This is unfortunately the new Moscow. Now let's move on from design to urban planning. Modern and successful cities try to be compact, because it's cool to make a 15-minute city where people don't need a car for everyday needs. And it's even better to make a 1-minute city when everything you need is near for you. It's a very important part of development. But in the new Moscow, instead of doing the right thing, they do it the easy way. And what did they do here, you ask me? Everything is very simple. If you just look from above, you will see that it was some kind of agriculture field. They just sold some land and started building it up. At the same time, there may be some kind of production bus with trucks next to apartments. Well, that's serious. People here live with a window view of the logistics center. Perhaps this is not the most pleasant thing in life. No one would want to wake up looking at this. It's better to wake up with a view of the forest, the river and a beautiful street, but not the intersection and trucks. Here, in the new Moscow, everything is in the distance. So much so that there is a very large residential area, then there is a field, then there is a coach town, followed by another large residential area. Density is terribly mixed here. Instead of getting a healthy, compact city where everything you need is close to you, you get… Some might say that it is an oasis of development, but clearly not the driver of this concrete mixture. But in fact, you get a lot of city problems because people get dedicated to cars. Since outside some of their residential area, outside their one block, they cannot move normally. Everything is too far apart. In this way, depends on the car appears. And it would be fine if we only talked about the new Moscow, but the people who live here very often go to Moscow. This is already creating problems for the whole of Moscow. It turns out that the new development forms are car-oriented, which paralyzed a normal city, Moscow, because Moscow is quite compact and dense. Unfortunately, the new Moscow doesn't. A little about design principles. Perhaps if you have seen Soviet districts, you have noticed that there is such a green buffer along the first floors between the house and the roadway. It's here too. And here you can say that there are probably bad designers. They simply don't know how to make an active facade with shop windows and so on. But in fact, the answer is much simpler. According to the old Soviet rules, there are communications in this place, and the developer must indeed between them. So the residents lose quite a useful area of the street, because nobody needs these lawns. Nothing will ever grow here, because network operators won't allow trees to be planted. Here you can't even break a flower bed, because in case of repair they will need to restore it all, and they really don't like it. In the other words, in the middle of the grass we have a sidewalk that no one needs. It's about 2.5 meters here, 2.5 meters wide, which do not work and aren't involved in any way. The air road of Vnukovo airport also passes here. Now planes fly less often because of the war, but imagine you arrived when no one was flying here. You bought a new apartment here, and then when construction is finished and you return here, it turns out that planes fly every 5 minutes. The best place to build a new district. And back to the design of the street. It's really time to do something about this, because problem is very old. But it's clear that no one does anything about it. Because why? They are used to building like this for a long time. It's already on sale, so people liked it. There is no need to change anything. But in fact, this is a big mistake and irritation use of land. There could be midway grasses, a small public space or trees. There is none of this, and it may never be, unfortunately. This is Filatov metro station, and this is a good place to talk about public transport and mass transit, how urban planners tried to make it, but couldn't do it right. At first, how would you rate public space around me? A granite place with many benches, noise from the highway and no trees. It seems to me that half of the residents of the new Moscow can sit here, but it's normal that no one will ever sit here. Also, here is the main road, two road understudies and then more driveways near the houses. Such a transit space instead of some public square near the center of attraction. But that's a little off topic. We are now talking about public transport. When they began to discuss the plan for new Moscow, some had the thought, if we will make only roads and parking lots, then soon the transport system will turn into a pumpkin and everything will be policed. We are so often scared by this, but here they realized that they would definitely happen. Therefore, they decided to make transport here, mass transit. They began to design a tram. Officials promoted several trams lines in the new Moscow, which would cover all the main new residential areas. Everything was designed, created the project, and then the project was cancelled. Probably the city planners decided to send the residents and the tram to the hell. Of course, a tram is a good. Trams are built quickly, trams are inexpensive to build relative to the metro system. If there was a normal network, then it would really turn out to cover the new Moscow. Because now there is a very small stop of the metro, but I will talk about it a little later. But look, money was spent on designing project. Then there are two questions. Why they did spend money if they threw it away? Because this is a budget money and in fact they should have saved it and spent this money on something else. Secondly, if the tram was needed but it's simply rejected, then it turns out that the residents were deceived. Because everyone said that there would be a tram, that they were designing it. But here it is a project and there is no tram. As I said a little earlier, only a small section of the metro system was built to the new Moscow. Every third train goes here, because when this section was handed over in 2019, there were no new residential houses. There was only one village. Everyone joked that this is the only metro station in the world that goes to the village. A very interesting situation has happened here, because there is Moskovsky, the small city in New Moscow with a lot of residents, but the metro station was built just away from it. There is a forest between them. At the same point, it suddenly becomes obvious that, guys, we are falling too much, that we are building a metro station not for the residents, but for developers, and they sold apartments at a higher price. Then they decided to cut at least a bike path through the forest, so the residents from Moskovsky could get to the metro station. Therefore, they even built the first big bike parking in Moscow here. It's a story about doing something stupid from the beginning, because where we have residents, potential public transport passengers, nothing has been built. They built it on the site, there was nothing. And in order to not to be felt and at least someone used the metro, they built a cycle-pedestrian road. This is a backstory from 2019 to our time. The Moscow urban planners are created roads instead of streets, cutting off housing from parks and other areas and making noisy spaces. But the streets in the residential areas are made better. What's the secret? The secret is very simple, because these streets were made by the developer. Business understands that people do not want to live with a view of the highway, but they want to calmly open windows, let their children go along to the playground, and most importantly, they understand that people need streets as a public space. But there is a very important nuance, because legally it's not a street as public space. But they look so, but there is no public space. It doesn't even have a name, only block and house numbers. This is part of the private yards, and residents pay for them. So it is impossible to make paid parking here or launch a bus road. In total, we have a metro station with public transport stops, but the residential area goes deeper. It means that public transport covers a small part of the area. Therefore, people become educated to cars, but, as we remember, they wanted to avoid this. In addition to the fact that the area is designed incorrectly in terms of transport and how people will move in it, there is another very big problem. Because usually metro stations become local center because they have a lot of transit traffic. You can place some office buildings, some kind of trade, hold fairs, festivals and so on. There are a lot of examples in Moscow where you can find everything you need for life near the metro. So you don't need to go to the city center, you can just walk to the metro station and everything will be there. But there will never be such a center here for locals, because they built roads, parking for buses and such public spaces. People will never stay here. This is already a planning problem. They built a small city that will constantly travel to Moscow, that propagates everyday migration and make people's life just less happy, because they have to spend hours of their lives just on the road instead of going down and getting where they need to go. I want to remind that all our lives are limited, so the time is very important question. Basically, please don't do this. Remember, mixed-use development. This is development when you have everything you need for life within one place. You can literally walk to everything you need. But here, when they were building, their task was simply to build more meters of human shelters. No one thought how people will live here. Now let's talk about social infrastructure. How do people actually live here? Because we already realized that a lot of housing has been built here. They even let some kind of public transport, make parking lots and so on. But you must understand that life is not limited to an apartment and a car. That there is a demand for schools, kindergartens, and they are even trying to satisfy these demands. Developers are building gardens and schools here. Then it goes to the balance of the municipality, because the task of the developer is to make walls, but the task of the city is to bring teachers and organize the works. Everything is clear here. But you have to understand that the district is built for decades. If today the main inhabitants of the district are about 30 or 45 years old, then all people get old and get sick. Here we come to conclusion that there are no hospitals, polyclinics, and no one is building them. Moreover, there are no centers for the provision of public services. If you want to get a passport, for example, you will have to go to a neighboring city. You have to spend half a day doing a simple task that people usually do in a couple of hours. I found a cool book from 2015. This book was prepared from the Moscow Urban Forum. The city itself ordered it, and it's called How to Build a New Moscow. The most simple and understandable name. They describe what the new Moscow is today. How should it be developed to take into account the mistakes of Moscow and the advantages of the new Moscow, to get not just fields of human settlements with cheap apartments, to get a normal urban environment and a city of the 21st century. I really like this part of the book. Yes, most likely the new housing will be high-rise, but at the same time there are a lot of country houses in the new Moscow. It will be very bad if there are private low-rise buildings on the one side of the street and on the other side high-rise building will be constructed. Here it turns out that there are no advantages of living both in a private house and in a big house. For example, they offered a solution to make a buffer of mid-rise buildings and townhouses between the suburban and high-rise buildings. So the advantages of living in the private and high-rise buildings were saved. But what I really liked, then, back in 2015, it was described that the new Moscow has a big street, that they will not build a city of 21st century, but just sell fields of houses, because this is a good business decision. But this will incur huge costs for the inhabitants of new and old Moscow, and as you understand, this street was realized. In reality, just high-rise buildings were built in the green fields. Also, I want to remind you about a very important rule of YouTube. Good videos from me, likes and subscribes from you. And in the description there are links to my Twitter and Facebook. Subscribe to know about urban problems and how you can solve it. Everything below this video. Let's do a little exercise for your eyes. Let's count the number of fences on one street. 1 fence, 2 fences, 3 fences, 4 fences, and behind the bushes and the intersection another fence. Lots of fences. Russia is big, how can we live without a fence? As I read from some philosophers that Russia is too huge, there is no end and no limit to it, and therefore fences are needed. A person knew his place and had a clear limit to his life. But under the current conditions it's not even funny. But nevertheless, the fence kingdom in the new Moscow. Come and enjoy this science. Another big problem is the accessibility of natural areas. Look, pretty beautiful places, there are rivers, hills, there is some relief and even forest parks. But this wasn't used in any way here. For example, I came to another place here. On one side of the new development there is a village with a river. On the other side of this heap of land is a forest park. But the residents won't be able to get there, because there is a new road. I understand that a lot of housing is being built here, and new roads are really needed, because there are not enough old ones. I don't argue with it, but I am for the need to separate the concept of roads and streets. If we build high-speed roads, they should go far from habitation and do not prevent people from living normally and enjoying the benefits of the place. For example, the blessing of nature, which somehow still remained here. And if we are talking about the streets, then they should be calm so the children can walk there. In general, I want to make a video about Moscow highway projects. They are also a big planning mistake, because there is a deception of roads. Instead of streets, unfortunately, roads are being built. Often these are the roads of death. During the settlement of houses, people begin to walk, commute on cycle and use public transport, so accidents begin to occur there generally. Unfortunately, there are such examples in Moscow, and in the new Moscow this is the same problem. Unfortunately, the developer couldn't make an entrance at ground level. To get to the apartment, you need to go one floor up. In the 21st century, it's horrible to build like that. I thought that everyone already knew about the universally available environment. But unfortunately, due to the fact that they simply couldn't do it normally during the design, they put in such lifts that usually work only on a day of acceptance. Then they are turned off because there is no one to monitor them. I will continue the ergonomic issues, because if you bring food in packages, or with a little kid, or with a bicycle, such an environment is hostile to you. You will not able to use this house normally. And the second point is that there are beautiful doors. They are even transparent. It's really good. But unfortunately they couldn't put an elementary stopper here, and therefore every time the pen hits the new wall. It's terrible. When everyone was discussing the idea of joining the new Moscow to the old one of the arguments was that federal officials could be transferred here. They wanted to free the center of Moscow from unnecessary cars, from closing territories, and give it to business and housing. In general, return the center to the people. The idea is cool, but 10 years have passed. None of the officials moved here, because it's more convenient to work in the center of Moscow than in the middle of nowhere. Only one of the largest and probably the only major infrastructure project was created. This is a new large hospital, which opened near the Olkhovskaya metro station. But there are two unknowns here. Firstly, the hospital was opened exactly between the metro station and residential buildings, and people can't get through because the hospital has a fence. How is to open a social service where people should be treated and not make a fence? How will they live without a checkpoint? To complement the way for people is sacred, as you understand. The second point is that such a large hospital should cover the districts not only of New Moscow, but also of Old Moscow, since everyone was brought here during the pandemic. But this hospital is so far away from everything that it takes hours for an ambulance to get here. This of course very bad. It's better to make not one large hospital in the greenfield, but medical facilities within a walking distance, so the patient could be quickly taken to the right place. As I understand, we annexed the territory, invested a lot of money, but it makes no sense. And by the way, there is another interesting example, but from the transport. Because look, Olkhovskaya is a metro station that was built in a green field at the same time with two roads. You know what's amazing? That you can't transfer from the bus to the subway, because the connection between these two roads and the metro station just wasn't made. The bus sometimes need to spend 20 or 30 minutes to get to the metro station from one of these directions. The priority of public transport, the convenience of using public transport, common sense. Sorry, but when everyone was doing this, they don't think about it. By the way, if you thought that transport difficulties ends with this, then no. Now they are thinking about the idea of expanding the new metro line to the new Moscow, along the line of second diameter, so apartments can be sold more expensively. Just imagine, they will build a metro where the local S-Bahn already runs. Also, the S-Bahn is more mainline transport than even the subway, and now they are going to duplicate it by the underground. Why? Because they can. Because building station in a green field is much easier. For example, since the 1980s, they haven't been able to build the central section of the yellow metro line under the center of Moscow. But to build such metro station in the field and then to build around parking lots, here you can go, it's not difficult. Recording started. When the van and plane pass and pigs fly, then we will start, because it's hard to talk about some kind of compatible environment here. Also, it's hard for you to see, but next to my cameraman there is a huge open hole. I hope he doesn't fall in there. And also I feel like the king of the mountain, the garbage mountain, the mountain of construction waste. But you know, it's sacred. Build a house for some reason do not clean up the area around. Also, you have littered it. If you sum up the results in general about the new Moscow in this video, then firstly, thank you very much for liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This is really very important. As you know, without this it's very difficult to improve the channel, so every YouTuber asks for it. Secondly, good quarters with a good environment sometimes appear in the new Moscow. But the task of designing a normal new city, or at least a district, was completely failed. Because on the one hand they wanted to make a comfortable city, on the other they wanted to earn money as much as possible and as quickly as possible. These two things don't work well together. Because when cities are designing new districts or satellite cities, then planning goes decades ahead, but here no one saw beyond 3 years. They build different residential complexes, but the new Moscow isn't a new city or new district. It's just separate high-rise complexes that are scattered for hundreds of kilometers. And very often there are no elementary pedestrian links between them. There is no social infrastructure, huge problem with transport accessibility. Because in Moscow everything is very simple. Anything you build is usually sold. Moscow is the capital of a very centralized country. Therefore, it attracts a huge number of people who move to Moscow and look for cheaper prices. Often they are looking for temporary housing. When someone buys a home in these apartment complexes, they don't plan on a long stay. Then they will move somewhere inside the Moscow Ring Road, for example. But they expect that this house will not lose value. It will be in demand to at least rent it to some other migrant workers, students or anyone else. But this is a very bad business model. It can be compared to a soap bubble or steroids. Moscow is being built a lot. Many people come to Moscow. It seems that Moscow is a successful city, but in fact this is such development on steroids. Your body seems healthy and big, but in fact you are slowly killing yourself. But if you have a different opinion, then write about it in the comments. I read them all. Comments were invested to say that the author was wrong. I remind you that under the video there are links to other my social networks and other videos. Be sure to look there. See you in the next video, Live Cities, and goodbye!